The CAP is a complicated politics, it's complicated policy, and it's ancient. So it's more than legitimate if you don't know something about it, and you need to know as much as you can. Now, I will start with the easy part, what we really know. So I don't know from which countries all of you are. I guess some of you are not from the EU, but the problem is a global problem. The CAP is just one of the policies which are touching on agriculture. And agriculture sees the same trends everywhere in the world. We have less and less farmers because we have technology to replace them, and because people don't want to be farmers, and it's not economically easy to be a farmer. So they intensify because they want to produce as much as they can. They also need to produce because we ask them to do that. And the consequences are, of course, biodiversity declining. These are examples from farmland birds and grassland butterflies in the EU. They're both declining, and the different colors in the left side that you see are different parts of Europe. So in green, for instance, you could see what happens after the collapse of the USSR, which was really useful for the birds for a few years. But now, of course, the declines are quite severe. There are also major impacts of how we are farming on soil erosion and degradation, overuse of nutrients that also go into the water, so they're affecting water qualities. And of course, there are issues about agricultural greenhouse gas emissions, which are actually either stable or even increasing. So the EU has not been successful in reducing greenhouse gas emission from agriculture. So the EU levels are going down. Don't get excited, it's not much in the last years. So it's the graph is not showing a decline to zero, but it's simply recent trends. Whereas in the agricultural sector, actually agricultural emissions recently even increased. And we need to be aware of the main reasons. 2/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions that are counted by the EU come from cattle and basically animal production. So this is methane and manure, etc. And the second is the use of nitrogen fertilizers. Additional to that, almost 25% of greenhouse gas emissions relate to mismanagement of peatlands. So peatlands are either saving huge amounts of CO2 and methane, or if you are drying them out, then the soil is starting to degrade and they start emitting greenhouse gas emissions. And this is only 3% of the area of agricultural area in the EU. So basically, if you want to resolve all the problems of greenhouse gas emissions in the EU, then animal production will be number one, followed, as I said, by fertilizer user and peatlands. But also we need to remember that agricultural greenhouse gas emissions are only 10% of EU counted emissions. But there are also aspects in agriculture that the EU is not counting. This is including the energy that is used for agriculture, for producing the products, preparing them, shipping them, but even more importantly, the import of, for instance, soya from other places, which is exporting greenhouse gas emissions to other places on Earth, like Brazil or the Amazon. So 20% of greenhouse gas emissions 20% of deforestation in the Amazon currently happening is going directly into our meat and dairy products. So the EU is importing soya and exporting meat and dairy products. So basically we are importing deforestation. Okay, as I mentioned, the problem is not only with biodiversity and ecosystem services, it's also a problem for the farmers. It's difficult to be a farmer, and what you see on this graph are the different numbers of farmers divided by the size of the farm in the EU. So the red part that you see are the small farmers with less than 10 hectares, and the different parts of the graph are the northwestern EU, the southern EU, and the eastern EU, or what you call the new member states like Romania, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, etc. And you can see just in 8 years a loss of 2.2 million farmers, and again, of course, in the very big farms for various reasons. So just to sum up the background of all this, there's basically intensification in many places, very intensive agriculture, which is driving all this problem, but also abandonment in places which are difficult to manage or not like profitable. So farmers have this problem that they are asked to provide food. Actually, more space we are using is for feed and fuel. And we are also asking to retain biodiversity and climate, etc. So they're under a difficult situation, actually. And this is where the CAP potentially could resolve the problem. But we need to remember that the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, is just one of the factors affecting farmers. And it's not even the biggest amount of money. It's 60 billion, but it's not that much. If you think about the market powers of what we buy, for instance. Yeah, but we don't talk about that much. Instead, we can go directly into what is the CAP. And again, if you have any questions so far, just ask. So, if we think about the CAP, then the best way to understand the current structure is that it has two pillars, so to say. One pillar is what you call income support. And this is basically a payment for farmers for being farmers, nothing else. This is what you call direct payments. They take about 70% of the Common Agricultural Policy. In history, they were coupled with production, and there was a lot of criticism that if you couple the payments to production, you are intensifying overproduction, waste, market influence in other places, like competing with other countries in the world with very cheap food. And the World Trade Organization was demanding a change of this system. And indeed, because of this pressure, the EU has shifted to a system where currently the payments are based on area, which is a different disease, because once you start coupling it with area, then the biggest farmers get more money and the small farmers get virtually nothing or really nothing. And you also have the incentive to buy land, so you have more area and therefore more money. Be aware that when I'm talking about farm size, I'm not talking about field size. Farm is how much a farmer owns or maintains. So it could be several fields, but we're talking about the farm. So this is an economic unit. Since 2013, and officially 2014, because of the pressure that the direct payments are basically empty payments, they put in this greening. The greening instrument was aiming to protect biodiversity in Pillar 1, and the idea was to incorporate 3 instruments, which is ecological focus areas, protection of permanent pastures, and crop diversification, because we know from ecological perspectives that if you have lots of fields in the farm, then it's better for biodiversity. But actually, this measure was completely distorted by reality. The permanent pasture was not protecting quality, but only area. And the ecological focus areas were completely ineffective because most of the money went to farmers that just did basically nothing. I see that there's a question. I don't see the question itself. I only saw that there's a marking of a question. Is there anybody who wants to ask questions about direct payments or anything else? Do you hear me well?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as I said, if you do have questions, as I don't see anything except for my screen, do ask.
Yeah, I did have a question about the previous slide where you said that abandonment was one of the issues.
Yes.
Like why biodiversity is declining. Why is that?
On the left photo here, you see an example of why is that. One problem is what you call bush encroachment. So once you desert a land without any management and nothing like including like pasture, like animals grazing or whatever, then you have a dominance of one species of plant that usually would just invade into the area. And in this picture, for instance, you see ferns. In the UK, but also in other areas, these are ferns that basically cover the entire area and nothing else grows except for these ferns. Later on, in many systems, you have domination of a forest, but most species actually in the EU and in many other systems actually are related to grassland. So if you are losing these lands to either bushes or forest or very intense structure, then you have loss of biodiversity rather than a gain. Okay. So you do have some benefits from abandonment, and you could use that for very profitable options, both for farming and for biodiversity, but also for climate. So, for instance, you can allow forests to recover, but you need to do it the right way. You need to bring the right ecosystem mechanisms to make the system recover, rather than just invaded by a single species. Okay.
Yeah,
but it's a relevant question for understanding the idea of restoration, actually, rather than just abandonment. So abandonment in itself is not a bad word, but in many situations, it doesn't bring actually benefits that could be gained. Okay, so just to make sure that we all understand the CAP, I still mentioned only one part of the CAP, which is 70%. This is the Pillar 1, direct payments. I need to close up direct payments with mentioning that although the EU was asked to phase out or to cancel direct payments, in the last reform, in return to putting some new green issues, they allowed member states to bring back coupled payments, actually. And many member states, actually, except for Germany, all member states brought back coupled payments, which are now 14% of this amount. This is basically like 4.5 billion euros that are really harmful subsidies. And in this reform now, there was complete silence about it. So basically they were maintained into this reform.
So what exactly are coupled payments now?
So coupled payment, as I said, are payments that are coupled with production. Okay. Most of this money usually goes into animal husbandry. So basically to intense and even intensifying of animal production. And as I mentioned, this is causing intensification on grassland and degradation of grassland, biodiversity loss, market influence, over nutrients in these areas, etc. So there are harmful subsidies from both economic perspectives and from biodiversity and climate, even much worse for climate.
Okay.
So this is actually the biggest, like the most harmful subsidy of the EU, and it's not cancelled.
I think it was a little late, but just like I was a little confused, obviously, because there isn't as much media coverage on CAP, and so it's kind of hard to see the transition. But like, what were the kind of policies that were that the EU kind of supported before CAP, and like how will that like kind of change over time? Like just a brief kind of overview on that. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. It's very weak, so it was hard to hear you. But I don't have here a slide of how the changes of CAP occurred during time, but I will talk about the history of the CAP very briefly.
Okay. Thank you.
So the CAP exists since 1957. It's more ancient than the EU. It's actually the first policy of the EU. And officially, the aims of the CAP haven't changed for the last 60 years. And this is actually one of the biggest problems. So I'll come back to that. And there have been many changes of the CAP through history. So saying, for instance, that the CAP cannot change is not correct. But at the moment, the CAP is captured into a system which is very difficult to change. And this is particularly because of the incorporation of direct payments. If you just pay farmers to be farmers and there's no return to that, then anything you will try to change will have extreme opposition, because you give me money and I get it, so I want to fight to continue maintaining it. This is also one of the problems. Farmers become dependent on these payments, and these payments also caused an increase in the amount that farmers need to pay for rent. A lot of farmers don't own the land they're maintaining. So one could show that there was an increase of 30 to 50% in rental prices because of these payments. So basically you take subsidies from taxpayers' money and they go through the farmers to somebody else. This is called leakage of the CAP payments. So from an economic perspective, this is extremely inefficient system, which is supposed to help farmers for income, but actually most of it doesn't go to those farmers needing it and continues out of the farming area to landowners, which can be also companies just owning land. Okay, and I see that there's another question. If not, then I want to continue into Pillar 2. Pillar 2 is relatively new, actually, in history. I forgot the exact timing, but it's, I think, the 90s. Basically, with the incorporation, with the growth also of the EU, other perspectives came into the history of the CAP. So the point is that it's not only about income support or production, but rather also about social questions such as rural development. So Pillar 2 has also the name Rural Development Program. And it includes a range of many instruments, like investments that can be good or bad. Actually, very often they're bad for the environment because it's for intensifying farming. It includes what we call agri-environment measures. Nowadays, it's called agri-environment climate measures within Pillar 2. So this is 4.5 billion euros currently, which are invested into measures that can help farmers do something good for the environment. These are voluntary payments, so the farmers can decide whether they want to take the money or not, and if so, they have to sign a contract of 5 to 7 years. And with this, depending also on the complexity of the program that they have to take, they can help biodiversity, or they can take climate-friendly measures, including also restoration, etc. There are many problems with agri-environment measures. They're complicated. Pillar 2 also requires member states to co-fund, so they also have to pay, and the member states don't like it because they don't want to put money. So if they can get direct payments being free money to give to the farmers, whereas Pillar 2 requires the member state also to invest, then of course the poorer countries don't want to invest. So they try to cut from the agri-environment measures. Very often also, the member states, like the administration, lacks knowledge and capacities. So they just register a certain program, which could be completely useless, and then everybody has to do it. So for instance, under agri-environment measures in Czech Republic, they just asked everybody that had grassland, they all had to mow twice a year in very specific time, and they just made a mowing party, and you had to do it within 2 weeks' time. And if you don't do it, you don't get the money. And that was completely disastrous for grassland. This is just an example of how you want to do good and instead you actually harm species, including extinctions even. There are also payments for organic farming, and organic farming is actually quite a success in the sense that you have also labels and you have clear marketing strategies as well. So although organic is not perfect and it's not always as biodiversity friendly as I would like to, at least it's not containing all the pesticides, herbicides, etc. And if it's organic farming of meat and dairy production, they're also not allowed to bring in, for instance, soya from outside the EU. So this is quite good. There is a large list of many different instruments in the CAP in Pillar 2. I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's one that you should definitely be aware of. It's called Areas of Nature Constraints. In history, it has the name least favored areas, and the basic idea is to pay farmers in remote areas that have difficulties, economic difficulties, and accessibility problems, etc. The problem is that except for the aim of paying these farmers, there is no other aim. So some member states used it in order to pay small farmers that really need help and do something positive for the environment. You call it high nature value farming. So for instance, in Romania and Bulgaria, it is quite a useful instrument. Also, I was hearing that in Finland, it's quite good. Whereas other countries are basically using it to pay farmers whatever, and it even leads to intensification. So the problem is that basically in this instrument, there is no guidance of what to do with the money. So sometimes it's good, sometimes bad. And a recent evaluation that was published 2019 basically said this is direct payments in Pillar 2. So if it's direct payments in Pillar 2, put it in Pillar 1. It doesn't make sense to separate. And that was also the Commission proposal from 2018 to basically take this payment and move it into Pillar 1. I'm mentioning that because the proposal from the Parliament and the Council is to put it back into Pillar 2 and to paint it green. So basically to say this is a green instrument, which in reality is not the case. So I think I'm nearly finished with the CAP structure. The last thing that you need to be aware of is what you call cross-compliance. Cross-compliance is an instrument which basically ensures that the CAP is coherent with other instruments. It means it complies with also other agreements, like climate agreements, with the water framework directives, with the nature directives, like the habitat and bird directives. So basically, these are obligatory measures that farmers have to take in order to have high quality farming in their land, if you want. Also animal rights, etc. The problem is that in cross-compliance, the requirements can be set by the member states, and actually there's very bad monitoring and the sanction is very low. So most farmers don't actually do anything And that is actually enough for you to understand the CAP structure. So cross compliance, I marked under it because it's what you call horizontal. It's everywhere in the CAP. Every farmer has to do it, except that most farmers don't. So just to summarize for you, what you call green architecture of the CAP, or the green elements in the CAP, are basically three. One is the cost compliance, which is basically obligatory for farmers. The second is agri-environment climate measures in Pillar 2, which are the best instrument we have. There are also Natura 2000 payments, which are even better, but they're very local. And the greening, which is a new instrument in Pillar 1, which was an attempt to make direct payments more green, an attempt that largely failed. Okay, so just to be aware, the official objectives of the CAP are embedded legally in what you call the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, which is as ancient as 1962. And nobody has the courage, with Brexit and with all kind of pressures from national, etc. Nobody has the courage to open this treaty. And it was ratified again in 2009. So basically, we are obliged to adhere to the original objectives of the CAP, which are completely not relevant to nowadays. They are post-war objectives. As you can see on the screen, they have to do with productivity, with standard of living, with availability of supplies. As if nowadays we have a problem of lack of food in Europe, we have waste. We're producing food for 10 billion euros in the world. So obesity, overweight, overproduction, the use of fields for feed and fuel are much bigger problems, but these are not relevant here. You don't see the environment at all in the official objectives. And even more so, you can see here this issue of stabilizing markets. And this is an objective, at least at the farm level, this is an objective that the CAP is not trying to achieve. We are trying to achieve stabilization at the EU level, but this is actually impeding or harming the farmers because they're exposed to global competitions. They're exposed to a lot of pressure, global pressure. So this is the official CAP. Then within the CAP proposal for the post-2020 CAP, or actually 22 now because they delayed the implementation, there are 9 official objectives. And the objectives are actually quite good if you look at them from a holistic approach. They include climate action, they include environmental care and efficiency, and protection of landscapes. So you have 3 out of 9 objectives which have to do with the environment, and 3 others that have to do with social aims. So supporting generational renewal, vibrant rural areas, protect food and healthy food, etc. That sounds great, except that it's not. The reason that it's not is because if you look at the reality, and this is the current CAP, we published this already in August last year, 60% of the money continues to go into income support. So basically into one of the objectives only, which is seemingly to support the income of farmers. But as I said earlier, it doesn't even work for the farmers. And then if you look at the other 11.4 under it, so number 2 is increased competitiveness. And actually we need to ask ourselves, do we all share this aim? Because competitiveness is actually the opposite of inclusiveness. So if you want to maintain farmers, then competitiveness might not be good for everybody. Now the graph on the right side is about how effective is the CAP for different sustainable development growth targets. I'm not going to talk about that too much, but generally we need to think about sustainability generally as having, if you want, 3 different objectives: economic, social, and environmental. And the sustainability, the sustainable development growth targets do see these type of aims. And if you look at the CAP objectives, which I just put them with the colors, then you see that they follow this logic. You have 3 for economic purposes, 3 for environment, and 3 for social. But then, as I said, if you start looking at the budgets, then in reality, you have actually almost all the money going in one form or the other to income. And for some instruments like improving position of farmers in the value chain, there is not even an instrument, not to speak of money. So it's like, how do you support an objective of the CAP without any budgets, especially if some objectives even come against others? I mentioned earlier the failure of greening. This is important because we need to ask ourselves, okay, if greening failed, is the proposal of the new CAP going to work better? So as I said, greening had 3 different objectives, and we evaluated already in 2014 and then again 2017 what happens with greening. And we evaluated especially the ecological focus areas. And we divided into what ecologists define as effective measures versus non-effective measures. Non-effective measures are basically measures that the farmers do anyway, like growing catch crops on the field or growing green cover, which is very good for protecting the soil from erosion, for instance, in winter. They need to do it, actually. I don't see why they need to offer that as a greening instrument, but rather they need to do it. But of course, if they have the option to do it and to list it as under ecological focus areas, then exactly that's what they are doing. So if you imagine that greening would protect landscape features, would protect terraces and small ponds and things like this, this is an imaginary situation because these are less than 3% of the options. There are some effective options that we're taking, like fallow land, which actually have quite a lot for biodiversity. But these are the minority. So the 28% that you see there is mostly from fallow land. The rest is very little. The other disease in the CAP is basically that it is investing in green instruments with an opposite relation between effectiveness and the amount of money available. So if you think of an efficient policy or efficiency in general, is when you invest where it makes sense to invest. So if something is not effective, you don't want to invest in it. And what is happening is that basically greening goes into direct payments. So it sounds really great, but it doesn't bring much. But then again, we want the money for other purposes. So you have huge amount of money which is going into non-effective measures, whereas for protection of important habitats in protected areas, you have on the right side, you could say 18 euros per hectare, which is basically nothing. So we're talking about 30 times more money for greening than you would have for effective measures in protected areas. Okay, so where are we standing now? We have the reform and we have a proposal that was made by the Commission 2018. This is the former Commission. Let's remember that the elections took place 2019 and we have a new Commission. But the new Commission is bound to the CAP proposal that was made by Phil Hogan. And it's not a good proposal. We evaluated it as well, and we found out that it's not too good. And the main reason is I'm going to explain in a second. But the main issue that I mentioned already is that there are new objectives. And the new objectives actually are really focusing on environmental, social, and economic perspectives. So this is an improvement. Then they proposed what they call a new delivery model. You give more flexibility to member states so that they can decide how to implement the CAP. But if you give more flexibility to member states, we know that basically they will not be more ambitious because they have more flexibility to do less. And that's the biggest problem. Giving more flexibility is actually counterproductive. The biggest problem with the greening was that there was too much flexibility. The biggest problem with the inequity of the payments to the farmers was that there was too much flexibility instead of telling member states, hey, you cannot pay so much to big farmers. So we knew in advance from the experience that already existed, if you give more flexibility to member states, although it sounds theoretically like a good idea, in practice, it would be misused. So that's one issue. The second part was to propose a new architecture of the Common Agricultural Policy. So what do they mean by new architecture? First of all, those greening aspects that need to be done, like the one I mentioned, like catch crops or protection of permanent pastures, go into cross-compliance. This is what you call GAIC, the Good Agricultural Ecological Conditions. Yeah. Sounds like a good idea, but I mentioned earlier that cross-compliance didn't work before anyway, because there are no sanctions, there's hardly enough monitoring. So you expand a mechanism that doesn't work. Then they said, okay, greening doesn't work, you cannot force farmers to do something that they don't want to, and here I actually agree. But the proposal was to invent a new instrument instead called eco schemes. Okay, now we give money voluntary to farmers, and they can take up this money if they want. And if they don't do it. But then the idea is to go the extra mile. So if they want to invest more in the environment, they get more money. Generally, this is a very good idea, and it works, for instance, in Switzerland. Practically, the devil is in the details, and I'll come to that soon. But eco schemes, if they are not going to be designed well, will not work, because basically what we see in the proposal from the Commission, from the Council, and from the Parliament is to include all the elements in greening that didn't work. So they even want to include income support within eco schemes, which wouldn't work, because we know from an ecological perspective that what works is to protect non-productive landscapes. So if you demand that there will be an income component in eco schemes, you as good as cancel them completely. And then, of course, the agro-environmental measures will stay, but they will have a smaller budget because we have other instruments like eco schemes. So you take the most advanced instrument and you cut even more from that. That's counterproductive. And that's why our evaluation of the proposed agricultural the CAP in the future is that it's basically weaker than before. As I mentioned before, there's also a new, what you call multi-annual financial framework. This is the other word for the budget for 2021 to 2027. And because of Brexit, we have to cut. But then the cut was on Pillar 1. Actually, there are new numbers, and now it doesn't look as bad as it looked a year ago. So we need to be aware, okay, Pillar 2 is not so badly hit by the Brexit and by the cuts. But still, if you want to cut on something, then cut on those things that don't work, like Pillar 1. I want to put it in a more visual form for you. So if you think this line in the middle will divide between the old CAP, or what you call now, the CAP nowadays, and the CAP in the future. So it's if you think about the different instruments in the CAP, then in Pillar 2 you have agri-environment measures, and we divide them into what you call dark green and light green. Dark green are those that are shown by evidence to be effective. They're usually complex, a lot of administration, but they work. And those light green that are okay, but they also they don't get that much money, so it's okay to have them as well. And then there's greening, which, as I said, is mostly useless, or at least has very little impact, and some works. And then you have cross-compliance on the entire CAP. And then you shift to less agri-environment measures, but eco schemes have the same aim potentially, and bigger conditionality, or what you call enhanced conditionality, which is basically the new name of cross-compliance. If you understand this difference, then we are already in good terms, because then you can start moving into the details of why we are in troubles now. Questions?
There's a question in the chat if the slides will be available after.
Yes, I can put the slides, and I can try to upload some more information later on if you want. Okay.
Great, thank you so much.
So, to explain the CAP reform process and where we are standing now. So, it started 2017 already. So, it's a long process. It's a complicated process. There was a CAP consultation with over like 200,000 people responding on this consultation. Actually, huge amount of response, both by the general public and by farmers. Very interesting results showing 94% of the public demanded an expansion of the environmental protection, but also from the farmers. 67% of the farmers expressed the will to have larger environmental performance, better environmental performance in the CAP. This is important because it indicates consensus in society. Most farmers actually want to do good, and they are completely justified. It's a justified demand to be paid if they want to do good. And so there is actually important consensus in society that the CAP could do better to support farmers that want to do good. That's all, and this is important. Okay, then the Commission released its initial text about how the CAP proposal is going to look like. In 2018, they published the legal text that they proposed. Then there was elections, so they could not continue, except for many internal discussions. I don't want to go into all the discussions of what happened during the time of election, etc., but we have a new parliament, a new commission, and with that, only last week came the EPs, the European Parliament, the plenary vote. And in parallel to that, there was a vote and the agreement of the Council, which represents the member states. What is their official position? Only once they voted for their official position, you can go into the negotiation stage between the three bodies that represent the EU. So this is the Parliament, the Commission, and the Council. To clarify where we're standing, from my perspective, if I summarize things in the simplest way I can, we have three branches of the dialogue from this point, or what you call trilogue from this point and on. And this is an internal discussion between the three bodies. This is the Commission, which is bound to the 2018 proposal made by the previous Commission. It's the Parliament, which is one singular body, but it represents a lot of different aspects in decision making. It includes member states, because of course the member states are represented in different numbers. It includes the parties within the Parliament, and additionally the people in there, and they have different opinions. The problem is in the Parliament is that there's also a lot of lobby pressure on the Parliament, huge amount. There are 15,000 lobbyists in Brussels, and also there's a lot of conflict of interest voting within the Parliament. It's legal, but it happens. So what we see in reality is that a large proportion of the participants in the dialogue and those people that voted also for the proposal, official proposal of the Parliament, do have conflict of interest. They're either recipients of CAP payments, or they are members of the farming organization, or they are being supported because they're politicians. They need support. They often get support by the same organizations that get the money from the CAP. So there's a lot of conflict of interest voting within the Parliament, and a lot of tensions of how to make decisions. This is what we saw that came into its peak, or culminated last week with a vote. Then you have the Council, which represents the member states, and here basically there are the ministries that are represented in this case, the agricultural ministries, and they represent the different member states. Each of the member states has its own interests. They have their own problems. They have their own challenges for agricultural sustainability, and they also have their own lobby pressures from different directions. But we should remember that most of them are represented by, so to say, conservative parties that hold usually the ministries for agriculture. So there's a lot of historical what you call path dependencies of how the Council is represented. So I had an interesting discussion with some people about who's worst in the pressure on the trilogue. And we couldn't agree, but now with the official positions taken by the Parliament and the Council, we can see that the lobby pressures on the Parliament have been even more successful than on the Council. But in both cases, the proposals made for the Common Agricultural Policy, so the amendments that they propose to change the text of the CAP, are in both cases major step backwards. They're much worse than the Commission proposal, which was, as I said before, it was already a bad starting point, and they both propose to make it much worse. So we're not talking about business as usual. We are actually talking about deregulation, or what you call erosion of environmental protection for climate, for biodiversity. And also they don't benefit farmers either, because they maintained the same diseases of the inequity between farmers. The worst news here is that once they go into the trilogue discussions, these are behind closed doors, and we know that these will be under a lot of lobby pressure. And usually after the trilogue, things look worse than they looked before. So that's where we are currently standing, and this will happen starting in the coming weeks, basically. So from a scientific perspective, just to sum up where we're standing, we evaluated already the 2018 Commission proposals. There were some improvements, but more risks, many risks, and the overall picture was pretty negative. This is why also in 2020, we came with a very clear statement by scientists across all disciplines: ecology, climate, agronomy, economists, etc., basically saying this is not acceptable and it's a risk to the European Green Deal, to farmers, to everybody basically, and we cannot afford that. And the current situation is that our recommendations were largely ignored, if not worse. They were basically opposed by the Council and the Parliament. I must say that we had excellent discussions with members of the Commission. They have shown great interest in improving. They're very ambitious. And we are still in very good contact also with DG Agri, and we are conducting workshops to improve. But we're heavily concerned about what's happening if 2 out of the 3 branches are proposing to weaken the next CAP. Now, here we need a few more details for you. We don't have that much time because it's the end of the evening. But basically, if you look at all the elements of the proposal for changes by both the Parliament and the Council, they're systematically taking it to a much worse situation. So in what you call enhanced conditionality, I made a small mistake here, a spelling mistake, but it's enhanced conditionality. They took each of the texts which are relevant for biodiversity and for climate, and they made it worse. The key examples are what you call GAIC 2. This is a new GAIC, or as I said, good agricultural ecological conditions. So GAIC 2 is for protection of peatlands. That was a nice new proposal of the Commission for rewetting and improving the state of peatlands. As I mentioned, 3% of agricultural areas, 25% greenhouse gas emissions. So you need to re-wet them. They propose to protect them. The Parliament and Council propose to just maintain them. What does it mean? It means you can also maintain them in bad status. There was a GAIC 9, which supports the EU Green Deal, basically to protect 10% landscape features, non-productive features. Then they proposed in GAIC 9, they are now proposing just 5% or even just 3% from the Council. So this is going directly against the EU Green Deal. But even worse, they define that it will be only on arable land, not on agricultural land. Just one word, but when you say that, you exclude orchards, you exclude grasslands, and so basically you exclude 40% of agricultural areas with just a change of one word. So that's a nice trick. But additionally, as I said, it's just 5% instead of 10. And additionally, they ask to include productive options inside non-productive text. This is in the small text under the GAIC text. So basically, you reincorporate exactly the causes of the failure of ecological focus areas, and you basically contradict yourself in the definition of non-productive land and then including a productive option. This is killing completely GAIC 9. And even worse, we actually nowadays have more than they propose. So basically it would allow reducing the amount of landscape features on many landscapes. And then the last but not least for enhanced conditionality is GAIC 10, which is a ban on converting pastures or permanent grasslands in protected areas. The recommendation from science was to expand the protection beyond protected areas because basically grasslands are worsening all over the EU, and this is because of intensive animal production, which is also as I mentioned, it also has climate impacts, nutrient impacts, etc. And many grasslands are really valuable also for good meat. If we do want to have some grazing on them for maintenance, but not this intensity. So the ban on converting in Natura 2000 areas should have been actually expanded to areas out of the Natura 2000 or the protected areas of the EU, and instead they basically changed the wording in a way that allows member states to reduce protection levels inside protected areas. So this is really a major worsening and a risk for grasslands, even inside protected areas. For eco schemes, I mentioned it earlier, they demanded that an income aims will be included. And they also asked to include production in there. So there's also the issue of how much money to put into eco schemes, 20 or 30%, depending if it's the council or the parliament. But actually, if you look at greening, which is currently 30%, you're speaking about either the same or less money. So 20% would be, of course, less. But if you include income, you cancel eco schemes altogether because the contents matter more than the amounts. So give me contents, give me good quality eco schemes, and I'm happy. I don't even actually mind if it's 20 or 30. Of course, the more the merrier. But it's really yeah, if you exclude those options which are non-productive oriented and really have some value for biodiversity and climate, then eco schemes is as good as cancelled. I mentioned the lower budget for agro-environment measures, but then there was another trick, which is within the overall budget for the new and greener CAP, they want to include areas of nature constraints as well. And as I mentioned earlier, they're not green. So calling them green when they're not is unacceptable. If you want to take areas of nature constraints, I'm more than happy to see the Parliament and the Council putting an official objective to support farmers in remote areas in doing something good for the environment. Great, that would work, but not just by naming them green. Then just in order to finalize here with shocking you about one more decision that they made, if from a scientific perspective and from the overall wording about how the next CAP is going to be, they're talking about an ambitious CAP, then you should see a call for ambition by member states. So the more the merrier. For instance, move as much budget as you can into agro-environment schemes and into Pillar 2. Invest in eco schemes, etc. There are many options how member states could potentially show ambition. Instead, the Parliament and Council demand an upper limit to how much member states are allowed to invest in them, especially the Parliament in this case. Whereas they ask to ring fence or to protect the payments that are income oriented, including coupled support, so coupled payments. So basically, they're demanding to ring fence and to protect harmful subsidies, and they prohibit member states to show ambition. If this is greener, then I don't know what is green. So this is just a summary of enhanced conditionality, but I don't want to go into details. I prefer to open the discussion. And I don't want to mention at the moment the biodiversity strategy, but let's recall that we're talking about 25% organic farming, reduce of antimicrobiotics use, reduce nutrient, and actually I miss here the chemical pesticides use, but I miss here also the 10% landscape, protected landscape features, which, as I said, if you ask member states to do only 3 or 5%, then you object actually the European Green Deal. Okay, in a way that could allow seeing you as well. So that was a tour de force through the CAP. I hope it was clear enough for now. If you need texts later on of what are the changes that were made into the different GAICs, as you call them, and how and what are the meaning of these changes, there's a good summary now in ARC 2020, which Sebastian Lackner published just some days ago, which summarizes each of the elements. So you're more than welcome to look at it. I can share it also on my screen later on, but it contains all the details, including the exact wording and how they changed the meaning and why this is so severe. Okay? Questions?
Hello.
Hello, Yusuf. I hear you.
Yes, sir. Sir, I just wanted to ask you that what would you suggest us if they ignore our letter, which is signed by more than 50,000 people? What should be our next step?
So there are many different types of next steps, but I think the biggest step at the moment is simply to give a clear no-go for the proposals without necessarily knowing what will happen. From a scientific perspective, I can give you full support for a no-go from Fridays for the Future. I can also inform you, so to say officially, we are preparing our position paper from Scientists for Future as well. It's just a matter of lack of time to produce this document, but Scientists for Future do support the demand by the public for a better CAP. I've seen that there's a lot of pressure on the Commission to withdraw their official Commission proposal. And I don't have a clear opinion on that. I cannot tell you if this is the right place to put the pressure or not. What I can say is that I guess, and this is a gut feeling, that if you just press on one side of the story, that doesn't help, because the Commission has shown the greatest ambition from the first place. So by pressing on them to show more ambition than the amount that they show, we don't resolve the problem. So in my opinion, what should be the case is two issues. One is to expose why the CAP is not good, but also to expose what is wrong with the decision that was made, why the compromises were not necessary. And this is what I want to explain in the coming minutes to everybody, because a lot of what we're hearing from farming organizations is actually not correct. For instance, that the CAP has the role of ensuring food security. I want one person to prove that there's a food security problem in the EU. In fact, even on a global level, we don't have a problem of food security. We have a problem of overproduction and inequity. We have a problem of food production in local areas that do need to improve it, but it does not mean that people are starving because of, per se, food security issues in the EU. And the EU is definitely not even trying to resolve food security problems for other countries, because if it did so, it wouldn't use or abuse other areas of the world to provide them with cheap food. So if food security was a problem, the biggest solution is to produce food instead of food for animals that feed people that want to eat more meat, and to stop producing food for our cars, right? So if food security is a problem, produce food. Secondly, everybody is speaking about food security because of climate change, right? But first of all, agriculture is contributing to climate change, and farmers are the first ones to be hit by climate change. They're hit by droughts, by loss of the soil. They're hit by environmental collapse. The environmental collapse by lack of pollinators, pest controllers, by bad quality water, by lack of access to water. And then it's all dry. So if there's no rain for a certain amount of, or there's a heat shock or a cold shock because of extreme events going to both directions, they lose all of the production. So the best way to resolve that is to help them protecting their land. How do you protect the land? You put landscape features, you put trees in order to maintain moisture, in order to create shade. So actually protecting the environment is the best means to help farmers maintain and sustain their production, right? So there's an insurance value there. So if they're talking about food security, then the biggest risk to food security is climate change, is environmental degradation, is lack of pollinators. You don't produce an orchard with fruits and you don't produce many vegetables without pollinators. So if you poison them, then maybe it's better that the CAP will prohibit that and support them to do better things. The instruments are there. Another thing we constantly hear, COVID-19 has shown how much production is important, etc. This is double lie. This is simply wrong. First of all, if you go to the supermarkets, I don't know about you, but when I go to the supermarket in Germany, the only thing that is currently lacking is toilet papers. In France, they have problems of red wine because people just, we call it hamstering in Germany. I mean, they just go and buy all the wine in the shop and then they can close themselves and enjoy their time. That's not COVID-19 showing a problem of food security. And if the aim is to produce food, who needs farmers actually? For producing food, you have one farmer going with a big tractor and you need less farmers. So the biggest problem for farmers is actually technology in itself. So if you're claiming that the production is the problem, then the CAP is not the solution. Actually, production is first of all not a problem because we're producing too much. It doesn't produce an income support because if you produce too much, the prices are going down. Whereas, for instance, if you produce organic food in a sustainable way, you can actually sell it better. So the demand of farmers is actually justifiable. So what I'm basically saying is that those organizations and politicians that claim to be representing farmers are misrepresenting them, either because they don't know the facts, or because they don't care about the facts, or because they're misguided by a very narrow range of organizations that have the aim to continue maintaining the biggest farmers and the richest farmers and those that get money but don't necessarily support the majority of the farmers. So this is where there's a consensus among both farmers and the broader society that we want to support farmers that want to do good and that need our support. And the CAP can do it. So if anybody says the CAP cannot do it, that's actually not correct, because all instruments are there. Put the money in the right instruments and it works. You know, if they say, I cannot give you a non-production area because I don't have enough money, this is what agri-environment measures are made for. Compensate for income forgone. Okay, that was a long monologue on a simple question. But it's important for understanding that every time when a politician is claiming that the next CAP is greener, I don't want to say you're lying. I don't want to come and confront them. I prefer that somebody else does it. But the reality is that they know, some of them really know that this is not the reality. Then why are they deceiving the public? Okay, that's one thing that can be done. Every time that you hear food security, every time that you hear we need to secure production, this is not correct. Every time that you hear farmers cannot protect the environment because they need to produce, protecting the environment is insurance for them. And most of the farmers actually know it. And we need not to fall into the trap of thinking that farmers are the enemy. On the contrary, the majority of the farmers see themselves as protectors of the environment, and many of them are right. And they are completely correct in demanding to be supported in doing that, giving incentives to do that. Yeah, so we need to differentiate between farmers, who are people, some of them might be your parents or your neighbors or friends of yours, and farming organizations that claim to be representing farmers but actually misrepresent them. And at the same time, a lot of farming organizations that do represent those farmers that want to do good don't have enough power. So you may need to help them in empowering the message that there is consensus in society. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this answer. I have a question about the eco schemes, and I'm not sure if this is a correct translation, but just today, Frau von der Leyen said in a live stream with the Greens in Germany that she's not ready to withdraw the CAP again and to start from zero, but she wants to change it in the trilogue process. And there she said that she wants mandatory eco schemes, or in German she called them Eco-Regulierung. I'm not sure if the eco schemes are the exact translation of that, but she wanted them to be mandatory, and I don't really get how a subsidy can be mandatory.
Okay, so two things. First of all, about the statement that they're not going to withdraw the CAP. I can tell you that I contacted Timmermans' office as well, not to say withdraw the CAP, but to say as a scientist, how can you support you? Okay, and the immediate reply that I got was exactly what I thought, which is we're not going to withdraw the CAP, and I actually fully understand them. The reason I understand them is because of two reasons. First of all, if they withdraw the CAP, they will stop the entire negotiation and start from the first place, which is a huge delay to the negotiations that can cause huge amount of damage, including a lot of political pressure, which I'm sure that Timmermans and von der Leyen don't want to receive. If there's one thing that the lobby organizations can do very well is to create shitstorms, and they don't want to be in the middle of that. They want, and exactly as von der Leyen said, and I fully understand her, they want to do them from within the trilogue, which means that they don't stop the trilogue. They want to go into the trilogue and discuss things. The trilogue has the aim of negotiating. Who knows? As long as, I mean, and many people said it, many politicians and policymakers were telling me, and we need to remember it in this form and to accept it in this way, everything is opened until everything is closed, and it happens fast. A lot of it is happening behind the scenes. Most of this will happen in closed doors. So what von der Leyen, Timmermans, Wojciechowski, who's also like the Commissioner for Agriculture, who's also very ambitious, and Sinkevicius will do inside, we cannot know. We can only hope for the best, and I can trust that they will try to do their best. Yeah. Nevertheless, having said that, they have to fight with two branches which actually do the same, because they represent the same people in different forms, and that's the problem. That's why, in my opinion, if you put pressure, as I've seen also on Twitter and other channels, if you put pressure on them, it doesn't help them because they anyway want to do good. Whom to put pressure on, I cannot tell you. Yeah, but I can only provide you with the evidence as to why we don't need to take compromises. Because basically, when compromising the environment and when compromising the farmers, we're ending with a lose-lose for everybody, whereas there are instruments to get to a win-win situation. And if policymakers are understanding that, then maybe something will change. But this will only change if enough politicians understand it within the member states. And we cannot address the EU as a EU because the biggest problem, the biggest disease of the EU is also the power of the EU, which is its diversity. They don't even speak one language. So the diversity of the EU means that a lot of the work has to happen now in the member states level and not at the EU level. Because the council represents the member states, it represents the ministries. If there are politicians that have the chance or the risk of losing votes because they are going against their own voters, then they might do something better. So any country which is approaching votes soon might be doing better under the right type of pressures. And I'm not saying I know which pressures there are, but I can only tell you that what are the narratives that you may encounter in the coming weeks that you can simply say, sorry, this is not based on evidence, this is not reality. So when you come to a discourse that you know that is false, like we need more production, like food security, like COVID-19, then you can challenge that and say, wait, stop. Or when you say environment against farmers, we constantly hear that. As if environmental NGOs are going against farmers, whereas if you look into the demonstrations, for instance, wir haben satt in Germany, those going to Berlin, how many of them were actually farming organizations? Yeah. But the power of 4,000 tractors in Berlin is stronger than 40,000 people standing there, because it seems as if most of these are green weirdos, hippies, whatever, whereas actually they include a lot of farmers. But also from a social science perspective, we know that a narrow interest group that has a lot of homogeneous form of interest is much more powerful than a heterogeneous but big group. Because a heterogeneous group is slow and they're not effective in forming a spearhead towards their aim. And that's a big problem. So how do we form a spearhead of societal interests together with the farmers is a task. It's not impossible because there are some issues where we do have consensus. For instance, everybody is saying that you need to shorten the value chain to make sure that farmers get more income from their own production. There are many ways to do that, not only the CAP, by the way. But we need to identify where are the win-wins. Where can we speak to farming organizations? Because if farming organizations make the same message, then it's powerful. Okay. More questions?
Summer.
Hi. I'd like to thank you for speaking to us. I hope you can hear me. This is of interest to me because I live in Finland and I'm a small sustainable farmer, and I can see the effects that this has. Like, I don't know the educational point, but from what you say, I can see what's happening on the farm I'm at and other farms around me. So it's very important to me. And I'm also part of some other organizations that are thinking about making some actions to do with this. And soon in Finland, the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry will meet and discuss, the proposal, I guess. They'll make a proposal and that should go through early next year. And when we're thinking about making this this action towards the ministry, there are certain people that we could target, like the head of the ministry. But do you have a suggestion about what we should be demanding from our ministries?
They should, in my opinion, rethink their position towards the CAP and whether they endorse what the council has basically voted on their behalf as well. So I don't have in details the current situation in Finland. The other thing is to remember that the member states also will have to develop their strategic plans. Strategic plans is basically how do they plan to do everything, and they have to do something you call a SWOT analysis. A SWOT stands for okay, now I forgot. Strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And when you do that, you basically try to map what's coming up. Is it good? Is it bad? What are the risks? How do you manage with that? And a lot of countries are doing that, but that's not comprehensive. For instance, in Germany, they did a SWOT analysis, but they excluded the entire meat and dairy product industry. It's like, wait, if you do a SWOT analysis without including the main pressure on the environment, then you didn't do anything for the environment. It's like, yeah, well, outrageous. So for different countries, there are different strengths and weaknesses. There's no single country that you can say, okay, this country is evil. There is no evil in this story, and this is why it's so difficult. So as I said, for Finland, you may need to approach the minister and actually going up to the highest level and asking, okay, are you really in line with this proposal of the council, or do you want to either reconsider your own opinion or try to help other member states coming to their senses? Science is behind basically saying there are ways to improve the CAP. It's not impossible. You can achieve win-wins. All the instruments are there. The public has made very clear demands, and this needs to be communicated. This CAP is not going to meet public demands supported by science. This is where Fridays for the Future are one of the most powerful organizations to put forth the demands of the public, which are justified. With that, I think time is passing, so I would like to thank you a lot